A mysterious laptop lies in the corner of a cafe you routinely visit. Discovered on one such routine trips designed to clear your mind and focus on the tasks at hand. You see it, down at your feet, at your favorite table spot. Your curiosity pushes you forward. Whose could it be? You realize that it's customized to some extent, and leagues ahead of your own equipment. What do you do? Do you take it? Do you return it to the counter as lost property? Guess which one of those choices is the right one. Welcome, listeners, to today's tale, titled I Found a Laptop Connected to the Dark Web, written by Maxim. When a found laptop opens a doorway into a new slice of life, one that's ready to take a slice out of you. Turn the lights off, the sound up, and get ready for something different. My local internet cafe is not much of a sight to behold. I think that's what may have contributed to it shutting down for a couple of months back in June. The exterior was reminiscent of an abandoned shack with its dilapidated appearance and broken windows. However, after they cleaned up the inside, I definitely saw some improvement. Sparkly clean tile floors and beautiful mahogany countertops filled the cafe with a sense of ease and elegance. I always got plenty of work done in there, so the shop's grungy look never really bothered me much, but it was nice to have a change of scenery once the cleanup was done. I was probably the only regular at the cafe, venturing in on an almost daily basis. Plenty of other folks cycled in and out, but nary a familiar face would show up. This was fine, since I only went there to edit my vlogs and website on occasion. Striking up a conversation with someone recognizable was not on the agenda, ever. I was there for some much-needed peace and quiet, not small talk. Though I had Wi-Fi at home, the thin walls there did little to muffle my father's drunken ramblings. The cafe was my escape from the unwanted noise. I strolled in on a Saturday morning, just 5 days after the grand reopening. I was feeling pretty groggy, still recovering from a cold I caught during the week. The humid August air didn't help matters. Because of this, I decided to grab a coffee before getting my things set up. I walked across the glimmering, newly replaced floors and heard them squeak under my sneakers. I laughed a little to myself, almost tempted to start turning in place just to hear the sound a few more times. No, I told myself. Grow up. I ordered my coffee and took a look around the room while I waited for it. I took a mental note of how many faces were in the cafe with me. I was surely going to grab a quiet little table in the corner, away from these strangers. Small iced regular? The barrister held out my coffee and straw. Thanks, I said plainly. I threw down a couple of quarters as a tip and strolled on over to the table I wanted. I spent the next few hours clipping and splicing my videos from the days previous. I was doing a week-long series about the gym I go to, basically workout tips and some comedy bits with my buddy Jake, who works the front desk. I found myself laughing out loud over a protein shake skit we had done. I may have drawn some attention to my little corner of the room. Though the staring eventually subsided, I felt it best for me to leave, as I had been in there much longer than usual. I reached down and unplugged my laptop charger, and that's when my hand brushed up against something. Confused, I took a look under my table to investigate. A 16-inch black bag sat just beyond where my feet were settled. It had pockets and a shoulder strap, as well as an abundance of dust coating the leather. Holy crap, I thought to myself. Someone must have left their laptop behind or something. At first, I was going to do the right thing. I very easily could have handed it to a barrister and called it a day. I guess maybe that would have been the smart thing to do. However, a mixture of curiosity and stupidity came over me, keeping me from being honest Instead, after packing up my own things, I swung the mystery bag over my shoulder and swiftly exited the cafe. Stupid. I pulled into my driveway about noon, the hot summer sun beaming down my front lawn. My father was doing his usual half-assed inspection of the plants in the garden, beer can in hand. I tried to get into the house without a word to him, but he stopped me just as I opened the storm door. Hey, why are you in such a hurry? He asked, taking a swig of his drink. Dad, I don't have time. Important website business. Well, he slurred. Don't stop on my account. But you just stopped me, I thought to myself. I pushed through the front door, passing my sleeping mother on the couch, and darted upstairs to my room. Slam! I shut my door hard behind me and locked it immediately. I tossed my belongings and newly found goods onto my bed and kicked my shoes clear across the room. I was excited to dig into this lucky haul. Carefully and slowly, I unzipped the top of the bag and pulled it open. I gasped a little to myself. Despite the appearance of the bag, the contents were no joke. A shiny brand new looking laptop was nestled nicely inside. I pulled it out and observed it with awe. It was certainly nicer than my basic 500 gig HP from a big box store. I couldn't believe what I was holding. I flipped it open and began feeling the keys and monitor. It was in mint condition. I had to be the luckiest guy in the world. Everything was there, including a charger and wireless mouse. I even found a bag of screen wipes at the bottom. I also dug into the pockets, curious as to what treasure I might find in there. What I found was a cell phone. Nothing special, just some cheap Android phone. It was still powered on and had no screen lock on it. Exploring it further, I noticed that there were no texts and only one recent call to an out-of-state number. Being into electronics, I went into the settings to see what kind of operating system it had. It was vastly out of date on software, still set in some variation of Lollipop OS. That's alright, I thought. I could still flip it for a quick $10 or so. I placed it on the bed next to the laptop and sat for a moment, trying to take in what I had in front of me. This was such a great find, but I needed to power on the laptop and figure out what I was working with. To my excitement, there was no login screen. I was in, immediately after booting it up. I was never as into laptops as I was into phones, but I could tell right away I was not working with your standard stock operating system. This thing resembled more of a modern setup that I had seen kids working with back in high school, but I couldn't name it off the top of my head. Luckily, it was simple enough to navigate. I set it up with my Wi-Fi and dived right into the file storage to get some idea of whose computer I had. I was disappointed for just a few moments, but after clicking around a bit, I did find a folder labeled A. Inside was one JPEG, titled 1 by 1. Intrigued, my stomach did a little flip as I opened the image. I was puzzled by what I found. It was a screenshot from a website. It looked like a post in some forum, from a user named Anonodon4, with nothing but phone numbers listed as 0 replies. Underneath the list was the tagline, "You know who you are." Scanning the images for answers, I noticed the address bar for the site. It seemed to be a nonsense string of characters followed by a .onion extension. Onion? Wasn't that a parody news site or something? I wasn't too sure, but I decided to dig a little deeper. I clicked on the X at the top, taking me back to the desktop. That's when I noticed another folder. This one was labeled Pics, which stirred up some more thrills in my bones. Yes! I cheered to myself. This would more than likely reveal the owner's identity. I became disappointed as I clicked through the pictures. There was no human life, just shots of different places and scenery. This included a dark image of a barber shop, a path in the woods somewhere, and even someone's garage. What really caught my eye was the last pic. It was the cafe. My stomach started doing acrobatics now, my heart racing. Why were there random pictures in this thing? Why was there a screenshot of a message board with a list of phone numbers? The files just weren't adding up for me. But I hatched a half-baked plan. I didn't know if it was going to end the mystery, but I couldn't help but pry. I pulled up the pic with the phone numbers, grabbed the Android phone, and dialed the first number at the top of the list. After only 2 rings, I was greeted with silence. Strange, I thought, but I pressed on. I dialed the next number on the list. This time, it rang 5 times before I got a generic inbox greeting with the phone number listed. Interesting, but I hung up before I heard the beep. I grew bored of dialing the random numbers. I decided to take a break and put the laptop and cell phone away for a little while. I knew I'd come back to it later. Once the evening rolled around, I waited for my parents to go to bed, and then fixed myself up a snack. This was pretty much a nightly routine of mine. I clicked on the TV, as I usually did, and settled on the first news channel I scrolled to. This is when things took a turn for the weird. A breaking news story was displayed on screen. One from the next town over. Young barber, age 25, found murdered at work. Damn. I shook my head. That sucks. A female news reporter was on the scene, outside of the barbershop where it took place. Wait a second. I couldn't believe my eyes. That barbershop. It was the same one, from the pic on the laptop. I was sure of it. I put my plate down on the coffee table and raced upstairs to grab the computer. I booted it up, clicked on the folder of pictures, and then the photo in question. I ran back downstairs with the laptop in hand and held it up to the TV screen. Yeah, it was definitely the same barbershop. Wow, what were the chances of that? I was shaking my head in amazement. I finished watching the news story and began feeling tired. I was about ready for bed, so I grabbed the remote. The news story just after grabbed my attention before I could hit the power button. Cold murder in local forest. This one was also nearby, just over the bridge in the opposite direction. This world is terrible, I thought. I hadn't seen 2 stories like that back to back in a long time. That's when it hit me. I scrolled over to the picture of the woods in the same folder. Then, I waited to see if the news stories included the location of the homicide on video, though I didn't get anything solid to compare it to. I was definitely getting weird vibes. First, a barbershop, and now a forest? I had to be grasping at straws, though. Right? I decided it was bedtime. I had a pretty restless night of sleep, tossing and turning, and kicking my covers to the foot of my bed. It was hot and humid, and I kept waking up with the sweats. Needless to say, I was in dire need of coffee the next morning. It was probably smart to leave the strange laptop at home. Grabbing my own equipment as I headed at the door, I drove rather quickly to the cafe, eyelids still heavy. I got my regular coffee and sat down at my favorite booth in the corner. Only one other person residing in the building, apart from the barristers at work. It was nice and quiet, and felt peaceful. A good contrast from my evening snack and a sweaty night of interrupted rest. Still, my mind couldn't help but wonder. The web address from the screenshot I found came rolling into the forefront of my thoughts. What was that onion domain all about? Why did the web address make no sense? It was something like code influx, all one word with random numbers and symbols after it. This was meaningless to me. I decided to do some research. I couldn't recall the exact website, but I remembered the .onion extension, so I started from there. I was immediately blown away. Apparently, what it pertains to is web addresses not reachable on normal servers. It takes you through something called Tor, T-O-R, and is used for some pretty shady activity. I guess it involves what's called the dark web. I'd heard a little about this before. I was beginning to feel sick. The websites listed on the wiki were pretty revolting, to say the least. Nothing I would ever want to be involved in. The worst part? I was beginning to think the laptop I found was used solely to access this part of the internet. I couldn't bear the thought of being in possession of it any longer. I had to do something. I stormed out of the cafe, ready to spring into action, when I was stopped by a tap on my leg. I looked down to see a homeless-looking man in a black tattered leather jacket sitting up against the front of the building. His face looked rough, complete with a badly shaven beard and cracked lips. He looked miserable. He held out a small plastic cup, looked up at me with desperation in his eyes. "Spare change, sir? I'm in a hurry, dude, and I don't carry cash. Please." He begged some more. He reached out and grabbed my pants leg. "No, get away from me!" I kicked his hand away. The guy looked upset. His eyes were actually watering a little bit. I felt a little bad. But damn, don't grab me. That's when the guy did the strangest thing. He took out a phone and started taking pictures of me. "What are you doing now?" I asked, confused as all hell. He didn't answer. All I could do about it was run to my car and leave as fast as possible. What was that guy's deal? I called my friend Peter on my way home. I knew he would have some more insight on this whole thing. I was hoping I could bring him to my house and have him wipe the computer clean. Then I could sell it to a random Yahoo and be done with this whole misadventure. Once I picked up my friend, I sped back to my house and showed him what I found in the cafe. He was blown away. "This thing is lethal," he laughed. "It looks pretty customized, honestly." "Yeah, I noticed that, but take a look at these." I clicked through the photos, showing him the ones that I compared with the news stories. "So you think this laptop has some sort of connection to the murders?" "I don't know, man, but I think there's something fishy going on." He shrugged and took over the mouse for a moment. "Where's the picture of the phone numbers?" "It's somewhere in the file storage. Yep, click there and bingo." Peter stared intently at the list and address bar in the screenshot. He also checked the file description and saw that the screenshot originated from the laptop, so it was taken from within the device. My hairs were at attention, all up and down my skin. "So, you tested these numbers out? With this phone? Here." I handed him the cell phone that came in the bag with the laptop, and he scanned through it rapidly. "Definitely a trace phone, something bought as a burner, possibly for some sort of business task. Shall we try another phone number?" I nodded and pointed to one just below the phone numbers I tested out. He dialed it and threw it on speakerphone so we could both listen to it. It rang and rang and rang. It didn't stop ringing, so he hung up after the 8th ring. Peter looked at the phone funny and then up at me. "I honestly don't know what's up with all this. Did you want me to just factory reset everything?" "Yeah, I mean, is that gonna take care of my problem?" "Not sure. I think I'd like to have some fun with this before we call it a day." I gave him a look, a glance of disagreement. I didn't think that would be in our best interest. "I don't think we should be messing with this, dude." "Come on, what could go wrong? You could even film it. This could go viral." "Well, I'm not gonna vlog me hanging around with a stolen laptop. Just do what you gotta do with it, and let's move on." Peter smirked, looked at the screen again, and then dialed another phone number from the list. Again, we got nothing. This time, just another generic voicemail box greeting. He continued onto the next phone number, and halfway through dialing, he stopped. His eyes were scanning the screen. His face was now white as a ghost. What? Why did you stop? You okay? This is my phone number. My heart panged like a club to a gong. This can't be. I scooted over next to Peter and observed the screen. He was right. Just to be sure, he finished dialing and hit send. He put the phone up to his ear and waited. Just as he expected, his pocket lit up, and his ringtone sang away. We both looked at each other in shock. Dude. My hands were shaking, and my mouth was agape so far, I think my jaw was brushing my bedsheets. How? Is all Peter could muster up from his racing thoughts. This is unreal. I don't like this at all. Just wipe the hard drive and let's be done with it. Wait, he shouted while looking at the screen again. My heart sank some more. I had a feeling about what he was about to say. What? Don't tell me. He didn't say a word. All he did was start frantically dialing another number. That's when I felt it. My pocket was now vibrating. I gulped so loud that I flinched. I reached down and pulled out my phone and answered. I held it up to my ear. Peter? I said through the receiver, looking at my visibly shaken friend across from me. This is messed up, he responded through the burner phone. I ended up driving Peter home shortly after. He had handed the phone over and told me he wanted to leave and take everything in. He left the laptop with me and told me he'd rather not mess with it. We decided to meet up at the cafe and drop it back off right in the morning. We'd wake up early and hopefully be the first ones in. However, I missed my alarm. Apparently, I also missed 10 calls from Peter. I opened up my message and noticed the 4 texts he'd sent. Damn, I had to get going and fast. I had already packed up everything the night before, so all I had to do, really, was throw on a t-shirt and shorts and head to the cafe. As I turned the corner to where the cafe was, I had to hit the brakes pretty quickly. What I saw on that road was nothing but cops and ambulances. There were roadblocks set up either side of the ambulances, and the cafe was barricaded. What in the... I was thinking out loud. This was crazy. There were people with their hands on their faces, looking scared and sad. I pulled over into the grocery store parking lot across the street, and then walked over to the scene to get a closer look. I assumed Peter was doing the same thing. I ended up in a crowd of onlookers next door, looking at the scene before us. There was blood splatter on the front doors of the cafe, and some papers, among other belongings, strewn all about. More blood covered the ground. Jesus! This was a damned massacre! I could hear the people beside me whispering to each other about what was going on. They're talking about a possible serial killer, one woman said to her friend. The kid was about to walk in, and suddenly bullets came in from over there. Nobody saw who fired the shots. A guy filled his wife in about what he witnessed. I was too curious to just be craning my neck from back there. I needed a closer look. I peered over at the cops, who were busy questioning a barrister by the ambulances. I crept past the barricade carefully. I slipped past a couple of other barristers and made my way to a second ambulance by the other barricade. The stretcher was in view now, but I couldn't tell who was in it. I decided to kneel down beside the ambulance and hopefully catch some conversation between the EMTs. I took out my phone and started recording. We lost him. He wasn't hanging in there much when we got here, but I was hoping. Jan, it's not your fault. You saved the girl. You can't save them all, you know? I wish I could. I heard him talk before he let go, you know? He told me his name was Peter. My hand jumped over my mouth as I let out the weirdest sound. It was a gasp combined with a grunt of disbelief. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. Yeah, the other EMT said. We have his information already. Guess he was an IT guy for a local business. Smart kid. Early 20s. I stumbled back a bit on my heels, dropping my phone in the process. I bumped into something solid behind me and stood up quickly. I turned around and saw that same homeless guy from the other day. My face was still contorted from the information I just received from my eavesdropping. The guy was just staring at me stoic. He didn't even react to me bumping into him. He was just glaring at me behind an unchanging expression. I couldn't help it. I booked it across the street to my car. I could feel tears forming in my ducts, eyes twitching in the wind from my open driver's side window. Why did I have to wake up so late? Maybe Peter would have been spared from whatever this was. A drive-by? An assassination of some kind? My head was dizzy. My heart was hurting. But I was beginning to make some connection. The pictures on the computer, the phone numbers, the murders, everything. I was getting an idea as to what it was I was dealing with. The stuff about the dark web, the strange laptop, and the phone numbers. I arrived home heartsick as all hell. My friend was murdered today and I couldn't stop it. Maybe if I had never grabbed the computer from the cafe, he'd still be alive. Maybe if I hadn't been so stupid, I could have handled this whole thing differently, and he wouldn't be dead right now. To top it off, I realized I left my phone at the bloody scene. I groaned and threw my head back in the driver's seat. Ugh. Now what? Well, the phone is near some cops at the EMTs. Maybe if I call, they'll believe I dropped it before they got there, and I won't get into trouble. I reached back and grabbed the burner phone out of the bag, and started to dial my phone number when I suddenly had a thought. If the phone numbers we dialed somehow had something to do with the murders, that must mean... I grabbed the laptop out of the bag, my heart racing and body profusely sweating in fear. This whole thing was unreal. The fact that I was right in the middle of it was even worse. I clicked on the folder of pictures of scenery from earlier. Again, my eyes scrolled across the picture of the barbershop, then the forest. Finally, my eyes got to the picture of the cafe. Yes, the phone numbers and these locations have to somehow be tied together. But I didn't know how. Why was this happening? I was about to leave the folder, but then a small number at the end of the list of pictures caught my eye. I hovered the cursor over it and opened it up. With some cloud service, the image was revealed. My jaw dropped in utter horror. A picture of my house. I was looking at a picture of my front yard and home. I hadn't noticed this before. Why hadn't I noticed this? Over in the top corner was a link, one that opened up in the full cloud folder from some email made up of more gibberish characters. The folder contained more pics that were very different from each other. No way! I shouted out loud, face contorted in anger and fear all at once. Pictures of me looking directly at the camera, others of my car. The last ones were of me sneaking into the crime scene at the cafe. That guy, the homeless looking guy from the other day, and behind the ambulance, I have his laptop. He was watching me. How did he tie into these murders? My silent tirade was interrupted by the sudden sound of a jingle to my right. The phone was ringing in my passenger seat. I picked it up and peered at the phone number. I couldn't handle this anymore. I just couldn't take it. It was my own phone number. Grudgingly, I decided to swipe and answer the call. Who is this? I stammered. A gravelly voice answered from the other end.
Spare change, sir.
What if a cat could write? What do you think it would write? Perhaps Bring back food or else? Well, in today's episode, a cat writes to its owner in a series of letters from the book Letters from My Cat by Helen Hunt. This is a continuation of a previous episode where I cover off the very first letter. Here, though, we witness the adventures of this cat where she thinks that her home is being ransacked, begins to fall for another cat, and finds something else that she hates more than water. Mates, this is a lighter set of tales to put a smile on your face and ease you into the weekend of relaxation. So turn the sound up, get cozy, and reach out to your inner cat self. Enjoy. Letter 2. My dear Helen, I do wish that you and your father would turn around directly, wherever you are, when you get this letter and come home as fast as you can. If you do not come soon, there will be no home left for you to come into. I am so frightened and excited that my paws tremble, and I have upset the ink twice and spilled so much that there is only a little left in the bottom of the cup, and it is as thick as hasty pudding, so you must excuse the looks of this letter, and I will tell you as quickly as I can about the dreadful state of things here. And not more than half an hour after I finished my letter to you yesterday, I heard a great noise in the parlour and ran in to see what was the matter. There was Mary, with her worst blue handkerchief tied over her head, her washing day gown on, and a big hammer in her hand. As soon as she saw me, she said, "There's that cat, always in my way," and threw a cricket at me, and then shut the parlour door with a great slam. So I ran out and listened under the front windows, for I felt sure she was in some bad business, of which she did not want to have known. Such a noise I never heard. All the things were being moved, and in a few minutes, what do you think? Out came the whole carpet right on my head. I was nearly stifled with dust, and felt as if every bone in my body must be broken. But I managed to creep out from under it, and heard Mary say, "If there isn't that torment of a cat again, I wish to goodness Helen had taken her along." Then I felt surer than ever that some mischief was on foot, and ran out into the garden, and climbed up the old apple tree at the foot of the steps, then crawled out on a branch, from which I could look directly into the parlour windows. Oh, my dear Helen, you can fancy how I felt, to see all the chairs and tables and bookshelves in a pile in the middle of the floor, the books all packed in big baskets, and Mary taking out window after window as fast as she could. I forgot to tell you that your mother went away last night. I think she has gone to Hadley to make a visit, and it looks to me very much as if Mary meant to run away with everything which could be moved before she got back. After a while, that ugly Irish woman who lives in Mr. Slater's house came into the back gate. You know the one I mean. The one that threw cold water on me last spring. When I saw her coming, I felt sure she and Mary meant to kill me while you were all away. So I jumped down out of the tree and split my best claw in my hurry and ran off into Baker's Grove, staying there all the rest of the day, in a dreadful misery from cold and hunger. There was some snow in the hollows, and I wet my feet, which always makes me feel wretchedly, and I could not find anything to eat except a thin, dried-up old mole. They are never good in the spring. Really, nobody does know what hard lives we cats lead, even the luckiest of us. After dark I went home, but Mary had fastened up every door, even the little one in the back shed. So I had to jump into the cellar window, which is a thing I never like to do, since I got that bad sprain in my shoulder from coming down on the edge of a milk pan. I crept up to the head of the kitchen stairs, as still as a mouse, if I'm any judge, and listened there for a long time, to try and make out, from Mary's talk with the Irishwoman, what they were planning to do. But I couldn't understand Irish, and although I listened till I had cramps in all my legs from being so long in one position, I was no wiser. Even the things Mary said I could not understand, and I usually understand her very well. I passed a very uncomfortable night in the carrot bin. As soon as I heard Mary coming down the cellar stairs this morning, I hid in the arch, and while she was skimming the milk, I slipped upstairs and ran into the sitting room. Everything there is in the same confusion. The carpet is gone, and the windows too, and I think some of the chairs have been carried away. All the china is in great baskets on the pantry floor, and your father and mother's clothes are all taken out of the nursery closet and laid on chairs. It is very dreadful to have to stand and see all this and not be able to do anything. I don't think I ever fully realized before the disadvantage of being only a cat. I have just been across the street and talked it all over with the judge's cat, but she is very old and stupid, and so taken up with her 6 kittens, who are the ugliest I ever saw, that she does not take the least interest in her neighbours' affairs. Mrs. Hitchcock walked by the house this morning, and I ran out to her, and took her dress in my teeth and pulled it, and did all I could to make her come in, but she said, "No, no, pussy, I'm not coming in today. Your mistress is not home." I declare I could have cried. I sat down in the middle of the path and never stirred for half an hour. I heard your friend, Hannah Dorrance, say yesterday that she was going to write to you today, so I shall run up the hill now and carry my letter to her. I think she will be astonished when she sees me, for I am very sure that no other cat in town knows how to write. Do come home as soon as possible. Your affectionate Pussy. P.S. 2 men have just driven up to your front gate in a great cart, and they are putting all the carpets into it. Oh dear, if only I knew what to do. And I just heard Mary say to them, "Be as quick as you can, for I want to get through with this business before the folks come back." Letter 3. My dear Helen, I am too stiff and sore from a terrible fall I had to write more than 1 line, but I must let you know that my fright was very silly, and I am very much mortified about it. The house and the things are all safe. Your mother has come home, and I will write and tell you all, just as soon as I can use my pen without great pain. Some new people have come to live in the Nelson house. Very nice people, I think, for they keep their milk in yellow crockery pans. They have brought with them a splendid black cat whose name is Caesar, and everybody is talking about him. He has the handsomest whiskers I ever saw. I do hope I shall be well enough to see him before long, but I wouldn't have him see me now for anything. Your affectionate Pussy. Letter 4. My dear Helen, there is one thing that cats don't like any better than men and women do, and that is to make fools of themselves. But a precious fool I made of myself when I wrote to you that long letter about Mary's moving out all the furniture and taking the house down. It is very mortifying to have to tell you how it all turned out, but I know you love me enough to be sorry that I should have had such a terrible fright for nothing. It went on from bad to worse for 3 more days after I wrote you. Your mother did not come home, and the awful Irish woman was here all the time. I did not dare to go near the house, and I do assure you I nearly starved. I used to lie under the rose bushes and watch as well as I could what was going on. Now and then I caught a rat in the barn, but that sort of hearty food never has agreed with me since I came to live with you, and became accustomed to a lighter diet. By the 3rd day I felt too weak and sick to stir, so I lay still all day on the straw in Charlie's stall, and I really thought, between the hunger and the anxiety, that I should die. About noon I heard Mary say in the shed, "I do believe that everlasting cat has taken herself off. It's a good riddance anyhow, but I should like to know what has become of the plaguey thing." I trembled all over, for if she had come into the barn, I know one kick from her heavy boot would have killed me, and I was quite too weak to run away. Towards night I heard your dear mother's voice calling, "Poor Pussy, why, poor Pussy, where are you?" I assure you, my dear Helen, people are very much mistaken who say, as I have often heard them, that cats have no feeling. If they could only know how I felt at that moment, they would change their minds. I was almost too glad to make a sound. It seemed to me that my feet were fastened to the floor, and that I never could get to her. She took me up in her arms and carried me through the kitchen into the sitting room. Mary was frying cakes in the kitchen, and as your mother passed by the stove, she said in her sweet voice, "You see, I have found poor Pussy, Mary." "Humph," said Mary. "I never thought but that she'd be found fast enough when she wanted to be." I knew that this was a lie, because I had heard what she said in the shed. I do wish I knew what makes her hate me so. I only wish she knew how I hate her. I really think I shall gnaw her stockings and shoes some night. It would not be any more than fair, and she would never suspect me. There are so many mice in her room, for I never touch one that I think belongs in her closet. The sitting room was all in most beautiful order, a smooth white something like the side of a basket over the whole floor, a beautiful paper curtain, pink and white, over the fireplace, and white muslin curtains at the windows. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the room for some time. I was too surprised to stir. Oh, how I wished that I could speak and tell your dear mother all that had happened, and how the room had looked 3 days before. Presently she said, "Poor Pussy, I know you are almost starved, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes," as plainly as I could mew it. Then she brought me a big soup plate full of thick cream, and some of the most delicious cold hash I ever tasted. And after I had eaten it all, she took me in her lap and said, "Poor Pussy, we miss little Helen, don't we?" And she held me in her lap till bedtime. Then she let me sleep on the foot of her bed. It was one of the happiest nights of my life. In the middle of the night, I was up for a while and caught the smallest mouse I ever saw out of the nest. Such little ones are very tender. In the morning, I had breakfast with her in the dining room, which looks just as nice as the sitting room. After breakfast, Mrs. Hitchcock came in, and your mother said, "Only think how fortunate I am. Mary did all the house cleaning while I was away. Every room is in perfect order. All the woolen clothes are put away for the summer. Poor Pussy here was frightened out of the house, and I suppose we should all have been, if I had been at home." Can you imagine how ashamed I felt? I ran under the table, and did not come out again until after Mrs. Hitchcock had gone. But now comes the saddest part of my story. Soon after this, as I was looking out of the window, I saw the fattest, most tempting robin on the ground under the cherry tree. The windows did not look as if they had any glass in them, and I took it for granted that it had all been taken out and put away upstairs, with the andirons and the carpets, for next winter. I knew that there was no time to be lost if I meant to catch that robin, so I ran with all my might and tried to jump through. Oh, my dear Helen, I do not believe you ever had such a bump. I fell back nearly into the middle of the room, and it seemed to me that I turned completely over at least 6 times. The blood streamed out of my nose, and I cut my right ear very badly against one of the casters of the table. I could not see nor hear anything for some minutes. When I came to myself, I found your dear mother holding me, and wiping my face with her own nice handkerchief wet in cold water. My right forepaw was badly bruised, and that troubles me very much about washing my face and about writing. For the worst of all is the condition of my nose. Everybody laughs who sees me, and I do not blame them. It is twice as large as it used to be, and I begin to be seriously afraid it will never return to its old shape. This will be a dreadful affliction, for who does not know the nose is the chief beauty of a cat's face? I have got very tired of hearing the story of my fall told to all the people who come in. They laugh as if they would kill themselves at it, especially when I do not manage to get under the table before they look to see how my nose is. Except for this, I should have written to you before, and would write more now, but my paw aches badly, and one of my eyes is nearly closed from the swelling of my nose, so I must say goodbye. Your affectionate Pussy. P.S. I told you about Caesar, did I not? In my last letter. Of course, I do not venture out of the house in my present plight, so I have not seen him except from the window. Letter 4. My dear Helen, I am sure you must have wondered why I have not written to you for the last 2 weeks. But when you hear what I have been through, you will only wonder that I am alive to write to you at all. I was very glad to hear your mother say yesterday that she had not written to you about what had happened to me, because it would make you so unhappy. But now that it is all over, and I am in a fair way to be soon as well as ever, I think you would like to hear the whole story. In my last letter, I told you about the new black cat, Caesar, who had come to live in the Nelson house, and how anxious I was to know him. As soon as my nose was fit to be seen, Judge Dickinson's cat, who is a good, hospitable old soul, in spite of her stupidity, invited me to tea, and asked him too. All the other cats were asked to come later in the evening, and we had a grand frolic, hunting rats in the judge's great barn. Caesar is certainly the handsomest and most gentlemanly cat I ever saw. He paid me great attention, in fact, so much that one of those miserable half-starved cats from Mill Valley grew so jealous that she flew at me and bit my ear, till it bled, which broke up the party. But Caesar went home with me, so I did not care. Then we sat and talked a long time under the nursery window. I was so much occupied in what he was saying that I did not hear Mary open the window overhead, and was therefore terribly frightened when there suddenly came down on us a whole pailful of water. I was so startled that I lost all presence of mind, and without bidding him good night, I jumped directly into the cellar window by which we were sitting. Oh, my dear Helen, I can never give you any idea of what followed. Instead of coming down, as I expected to on the cabbages, which were just under that window the last time I was in the cellar, I found myself sinking in some horrible, soft, slimy, sticky substance, which in an instant more would have closed over my head and suffocated me. But fortunately, as I sank, I felt something hard at one side, and making great effort, I caught on it with my claw. It proved to be the side of a barrel, and I succeeded in getting one paw over the edge of it. There I hung, growing weaker and weaker every minute, which, with this frightful stuff running into my eyes and ears, and choking me with its bad smell, I mewed as loud as I could, which was not very loud, for whenever I opened my mouth, the stuff trickled into it off my whiskers. But I called to Caesar, who stood in great distress at the window, and explained to him, as well as I could, what had happened to me, and begged him to call as loudly as possible, for if somebody did not come very soon and take me out, I should certainly die. He insisted at first on jumping down to help me himself, but I told him that would be the most foolish thing he could do. If he did, we should certainly both be drowned. So he began to mew at the top of his voice, and between his mewing and mine, there was noise enough for a few minutes. Then windows began to open, and I heard your grandfather swearing and throwing out a stick of wood at Caesar. Fortunately, he was so near the house that it did not hit him. At last, your grandfather came downstairs and opened the back door, and Caesar was so frightened that he ran away, for which I have never thought so well of him since, though we are still very good friends. When I heard him running off and calling back to me from a distance that he was so sorry he could not help me, my courage began to fail, and in a moment more I should have let go of the edge of the barrel and sunk to the bottom. But luckily, your grandfather noticed that there was something very strange about my mewing, and opened the door at the head of the cellar stairs, saying, "I do believe that cat is in some trouble down there." Then I made a great effort and mewed still more piteously. How I wished I could call out and say, "Yes, indeed I am! Drowning to death, in, I'm sure, I don't know what, but something a great deal worse than water." However, he understood me as it was and came down with a lamp. As soon as he saw me, he set the lamp down on the cellar bottom and laughed so that he could hardly move. I thought this was the most cruel thing I ever heard of. If I had not been, as it were, at death's door, I should have laughed at him, too, for even with my eyes full of that dreadful stuff, I could see that he looked very funny in his red nightcap, and without his teeth. He called out to Mary and your mother, who stood at the head of the stairs. Come down, come down. Here's the cat in the soft soap barrel. And then he laughed again, and they both came down the stairs laughing, even your dear, kind mother, who I never could have believed would laugh at anyone in such trouble. They did not seem to know what to do at first. Nobody wanted to touch me, and I began to be afraid I should drown while they stood looking at me, for I knew much better than they how weak I was from holding onto the edge of the barrel so long. At last your grandfather swore that oath of his. You know the one I mean. The one he always swears when he is very sorry for anybody, and lifted me out by the nape of my neck, holding me as far from him as he possibly could, for the soap ran off my legs and tail in streams. He carried me into the kitchen, and put me down in the middle of the floor, and then they all stood around me and laughed again, so loud that they waked up the cook, who came running out of her bedroom with a tin candlestick and a chair in her hand, thinking that robbers were breaking in. At last your dear mother said, Poor pussy, it is too bad to laugh at you when you are in such pain. I had been thinking so for some time. Mary, bring the small washtub. The only thing we can do is to wash her. When I heard this, I almost wished they had left me to drown in the soft soap. For if there is anything of which I have a mortal dread, it is water. However, I was too weak to resist, and they plunged me in all over into the tub full of ice-cold water, and Mary began to rub me with her great rough hands, which I assure you are very different from yours and your mother's. Then they all laughed again to see the white lather it made. In 2 minutes, the whole tub was as white as the water under the mill wheel that you and I have so often been together to see. You can imagine how my eyes smarted. I burnt my paws once in getting a piece of beefsteak out of the coals where it had fallen off the gridiron. But the pain of that was nothing to this. You will hardly believe me when I tell you that they had to empty the tub and fill it again 10 times before the soap was all washed out of my fur. By that time I was so cold and exhausted that I could not move, and they began to think I should die. But your mother rolled me up into one of your old flannel petticoats and made a nice bed for me behind the stove. By this time even Mary began to seem sorry for me, though she was very cross at first, and hurt me much more than she need to in washing me. Now she said, You're nothing but a poor beast of a cat, to be sure, but it's myself that would be sorry to have the little mistress come back and find ye killed. So you see your love for me did me service, even when you were so far away. I doubt very much whether they would have ever taken the trouble to nurse me through this sickness, except for your sake. But I must leave the rest for my next letter. I am not strong enough yet to write more than 2 hours at a time. Your affectionate Pussy. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing a cat's perspective of life. Sheesh, this cat has it hard, right? In fairness, the cat did almost drown in soap, which is awful. But the imagery that was conjured by Helen Hart had me imagining the entire scene from both the cat's perspective and the human's. I found it really funny though when Caesar just cheesed it out of there whilst mewing, "You're on your own, love," whilst the drowning cat was just left there to ponder her demise, but also understood and had enough emotional range to know that there was nothing he could do. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I certainly had a lot of fun narrating it, and I hope you had just as much fun listening to it. No plug today, mate. Just enjoy your Friday. Take the load off. Take it easy, and as always, till next we meet.